all about Jesus. All about Jesus. And our message today, no food, no problem. You know, I don't know about you, but I just hate it when I go through the drive-thru and my mouth is just watering and I'm just really in the mood for something, and I pull up to the speaker and I'll give them the order, and the lady or whoever's on the speaker on the other end, they'll say, well, that'll be about 10 minutes. And of course, when they say that, that's usually a time when I pulled in there simply because I'm in a hurry. Or what really gets me is when I go up there and I will say, I want to order a certain item from your menu, and what do they say then? They say, we're sorry, but we're out of that. Has that ever happened to you? No food. And folks, that's a problem. And then there's the inevitable. I can go to the McDonald's and I will order ice cream, or I'll order a milkshake. And some of you are already grinning. You know what they're going to say then. What are they inevitably going to say at McDonald's when you order ice cream or a milkshake? The machine is broken. And that, I don't care, whenever I order it, it's going to be that way. That's a major problem. You know, today is the start of what we call our Thanksgiving week. Thanksgiving is the fourth Thursday in November, and it's the day that's been set aside to we give thanks for our blessings. Now, the holiday has been celebrated for centuries. It's celebrated on different dates in other countries. It's in October in Canada, for example. It's only been on the fourth Thursday in November in America since 1939. And the reason for that was they moved it to the fourth Thursday instead of the last Thursday, so you would sometimes you would have an extra week of shopping for the Christmas time. It was because the people were coming out of the Great Depression. It was an economic decision. But still, even with that in mind, Thanksgiving is a time in which we consciously focus on how God has blessed us. But it's also a time when we really look at how God has blessed us, that we can build our own faith. I'm talking about building a real, deep faith that impacts you and those around you. I'm talking about a time in which you can stretch your faith. And I'm going to challenge you today that you can stretch your faith at Thanksgiving. You can stretch your faith during this Thanksgiving season. I want to read about the greatest feast ever recorded in history. There's no turkey there, no mashed potatoes, no pecan pie. Just a little bit of fish and bread, almost no food. And yet, that was not a problem. So let's read how Matthew records this feast in Matthew chapter 14, verses 13 through 21. Now when Jesus heard this, he withdrew from there in a boat to a desolate place by himself. But when the crowds heard it, they followed him on foot from the towns. When he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion on them and healed their sick. Now when it was evening, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a desolate place, and the day is now over. Send the crowds away to go into the villages and buy food for themselves." But Jesus said, "They need not go away. You give them something to eat." They said to him, "We have only 5 loaves here and 2 fish." And he said, "Bring them here to me." Then he ordered the crowds to sit down on the grass. And taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and said a blessing. Then he broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples, And the disciples gave them to the crowds, and they all ate and were satisfied. And they took up 12 baskets full of the broken pieces left over. And those who ate were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. Most of us learned this story when we were children. I referenced it a few weeks ago as it leads into the account about Jesus walking on water, which I preached about a few weeks ago. It's a story that's so great that one commentary I consulted this week noted that it is the only one of Jesus' miracles that's recorded in all four of the Gospels. Now, Jesus, during his ministry, by this time, he was drawing great crowds. And it wasn't easy to get away from him. It was a small country. It wasn't easy to get away from these crowds. But even with all of this commotion going on around Jesus, he was very popular. With all that commotion, Jesus still remained focused on people. He was focused on people. They were people who might have been hurting physically. They might be people who had emotional hurts and baggage. After a long day, they were people who were hungry. They were people who had needs. And I think that we can all identify with everything I've just said there. We've all been in those situations. And at this time of the year, when we focus on giving thanks here in the United States of America, we focus upon what God has done for us. Well, here Jesus gives us some lessons about giving thanks. But not just giving thanks from our dinner tables, but also into a world that's experiencing a deep spiritual crisis. So I want you to look at what Jesus did here when he fed these 5,000 men. And I think there's some lessons that we can take into our lives every day here in 2025. And the first one is to show compassion. That's very simple. Show compassion. That might be the simplest way to stretch your faith. Simply show compassion. Give someone who needs it food. Give someone who needs it clothing. Give them a ride when they need it. Feel empathy for people. You know, it can be easy to get caught up in our own rat race, in our own world that has little time to breathe. I get there a lot. It's easy to get caught up in keeping up with our neighbors and get caught up in trying to accumulate more. But what did Jesus do? He showed compassion on people. And it can be very oblivious, though, for us. It can be very easy, rather. It can be very easy to be oblivious to those who are around us. Jesus showed compassion. Jesus wasn't oblivious. When you look at Jesus' ministry, the plight of people never escaped him, did it? He always was aware of what people needed. And even though he knew he was about to perform a miracle of incredible magnitude, one like they'd never seen before, one that's going to be performed in front of a huge crowd, Jesus still felt one of the most basic of human emotions: compassion. He had compassion. Look at verse 14. When he went ashore and saw a great crowd, he had compassion on them and healed their sick. Now, people already knew about his ability to heal. They'd heard about it. I'm sure some of these people had already seen him do that. Some of them may have already experienced it. We don't know. But these people knew about Jesus' ability to heal. but I doubt any of them had any inkling about what was about to happen before their own eyes. Jesus was going to take what we would see today as something amounting to a supersized meal at Long John Silver's and feeding a crowd that would fill Rupp Arena. That's pretty much what it was. I mentioned that a few weeks ago. Jesus took what we would see as a supersized meal at Long John Silver's or Captain D's or somewhere like that, and blessed it and fed a crowd that could pretty much fill Rupp Arena. Folks, that's incredible. But it all started with Jesus' compassion. That's that human side of Jesus showing up. He's the Son of God, but he still felt compassion for the people. Remember when he entered Jerusalem, the week before he was, the Sunday before he was crucified, we're told that Luke, when Luke wrote, and when he drew, Luke wrote, and when he drew near and saw the city, he wept over it. Jesus hurt for people. He showed compassion on people. Have you ever tried to wonder what would Jesus think if he visited us today? What would Jesus say or do if he were living here amongst us today? Some look at how Jesus went into the temple and overturned the tables, and they say, I'm sure he would be angry because there's so much sin in the world, and we seem to even promote the sinful nature. But others would say, I believe he'd weep at the world around us. Now obviously this is all conjecture. I believe Jesus would probably have a combination of the two. I think he'd be angry at the sin, but he would also feel for people and be weeping for people. I believe Jesus would be weeping over the plight of those who are caught in slavery of addiction, whether they're prescribed to the drugs or not. He would be weeping over people caught in the throes of alcoholism. He'd be weeping, I believe, over the widespread addiction to porn and sexual sins. Perhaps he'd be weeping over poverty. And that poverty is sometimes brought about by decisions driven by those sinful nature, by the addictions and the sinful lifestyles. But sometimes that poverty is driven by the randomness of life. Perhaps a sickness has wiped out finances or left someone unable to work. I think Jesus would weep over those. I think he would have compassion, just like we are to have compassion. If we are truly following Jesus Christ, showing compassion to those in need as us. Jesus said, welcoming strangers, clothing those who are naked, to visit the sick and the like. And he said, truly I say to you, as you did it to the least of these, my brothers, you did it to me. That's in Matthew 25. Folks, we're entering into the holiday, what we know as the holiday season. Most towns, I haven't been to Springfield over the last few weeks, but most towns I've been in over the last few weeks are already lit up for Christmas. They're already lit up. They're already decorated. And they will stay that way until January. We visit light displays. We're taking a group here to the Ark Encounter for their light display, the Christian light display Friday, and there's other places like that. But it's a festive time, but it's also a time of depression for many people. It's a very difficult time for many people over these next few weeks, because often that flaunting of the joy, the flaunting of wealth, the constant, I don't know what you'd call it, we're inundated with things during the Christmas time. And it reminds many people of their plight. But I believe that oftentimes that a warm meal, a thoughtful but needed gift, or gestures of kindness can and speak to people in need much greater than anything else. That's part of our own Thanksgiving. Show compassion. Show compassion to people. But the second thing I see that what Jesus did, he says, give from what you don't have. Let me repeat that. Give from what you don't have. Now there's some of you out here that say, John has lost his mind. Give what you don't have. How can I give what I don't have? Well, hear me out, because I think that's exactly what happened when Jesus fed the 5,000, and I think you'll see where I'm coming from in a minute. I find that dynamic that happened around this miracle, I find it just fascinating. Because one thing that I think is interesting is that the disciples, they already had taken an initiative. They had taken an initiative to suggest that the crowd dispersed. They saw this huge crowd. They knew it was time to eat. And they knew they didn't have any food or didn't have much food. So they made this suggestion to disperse. Look what they said in Matthew 14:15. This is a desolate place, and the day is now over. Send the crowds away to go into the villages and buy food from themselves. Like I said, they knew they had a crowd here that could be topping 10, maybe close to 20,000 people. What did the Bible say? 5,000 men besides women and children. So you could be talking at a huge, huge crowd. And they knew that they didn't have enough to feed them. You know, I've heard people preach about this and criticize the disciples for making that suggestion, but when people criticize them, we have that advantage of looking at things from hindsight and knowing what was about to happen. In real time, they'd never seen anything like this. I wonder if they even registered in their minds, Jesus can handle this. He had amazed them so many times, but to me, this was something that is off the charts. But what they found was a kid with 5 small loaves of bread, 2 fish. Andrew said that it was, or rather John tells us that it was Andrew who found this boy. But it was a little boy, a small boy, a young boy. It would have been easy for that boy to say, nope, I'm not giving you my food. I'm hungry. And this isn't even enough to feed me and my best friend, much less anybody else. And when you be looking at things through man's eyes, you know something, he'd be right, wouldn't he? Looking at it through man's eyes, he'd be right. It would have been easy for the disciples to say, again, look, it's time to go home. You hang around here. You're going to be hungry because we don't have any food. But Jesus had other plans, and he said to tell the people they don't need to go away, and you're going to give them something to eat. Then he said, give me that bread and fish. And you know the story. He blessed it, and everyone was able to eat. Everyone was not only able to eat, they had more than enough to eat. The key here was there wasn't much food, maybe enough for 1 or 2 people. It wasn't a lot. But it was given to Jesus. There was just a little bit of food, and it was given to Jesus. And what did he do? He created this meal, this incredible miracle. The disciples might have had major doubt, but they still gave their food to Jesus when he said, give it to me. Give that to me. It wasn't much, but they gave what was there. That's how you give with what you don't really have. You know, today we often say things like, give what you can. And there's some truth to that, I'm sure. because sometimes we have the bare necessities, trying to buy the bare necessities such as food, clothing, or rent or house payment, medical bills. Those things are responsibilities and they're important. They're extremely important. But we can also get caught up into the trap of wanting more and more and more. More house than we need, more clothing than we need, more things than we need. Jesus seems to be teaching again not to worry about those things. He does that other places throughout his ministry as well. He knew what food was available. Yet he took a meal that maybe we could buy today for $10 and turned it into a meal for $1,000. Giving of what you don't have might seem confusing at first. But what I want you to see here is that Jesus is teaching that nothing you give is insignificant. Nothing that you give is insignificant. Again, nothing is insignificant. You may or may not have worldly wealth. If you have worldly wealth, give. If you don't have worldly wealth, give anyway. You may have very little, give. You may have a lot, give. Don't worry about the size of your gift. Worry about the size of the faith that gives it. Let me repeat that. Don't worry about the size of the gift. Worry only about the size of the faith that gives it. Give even if you don't have. Give from what you don't have. And finally, stretch your faith in what God can do. You know, I think this is the most powerful lesson that we see today. It's a powerful lesson in giving thanks because it's not easy to look beyond what we can see. Sometimes we have to look beyond what we can see and go on faith. That's what I'm teaching here. That's what I'm saying here. That's what I see that we see in this passage that Jesus did in Matthew 14. And I'll tell you, I'm guilty as charged in that. Of sometimes failing to see beyond what I can see. I like to be in control. I like to see what I'm doing. I like to see where my money is going. Had I been in that crowd, when my stomach started growling, I might have been looking for the nearest Wendy's, even if it was 20 miles away. I would have known there wasn't enough food. And I just wonder if I'd have stayed around. And if I'd have been honest, and I think if we're honest, I believe that many of us here would have done the same thing. Instead, what did we see? Jesus took care of things. He looked to heaven. He blessed the food. He broke the loaves. And then the disciples gave the food to the people. I can't imagine what those people were thinking. They knew there had been 5 loaves and 2 fish. They knew there wasn't much. And here Jesus blessed it. And what happened? The food just kept coming. It kept coming. I can't imagine what they were thinking. They kept eating. And they kept eating until they'd had enough. Look at verse 20. And they all ate and were satisfied. And they took up 12 baskets full of the broken pieces left over. A lot of times I like to look in the original Greek language, consult some of the study books I have about it. And this week I ran across something very interesting about this passage. The word that's translated baskets here, the Greek word kophanoi, referred to wicker baskets that were used to carry food. But the writer said, and I quote here, they were not a gesture of frugality, but of abundance. In other words, they weren't small baskets. They weren't these little lunch boxes or anything. They were big, large baskets. 12 baskets full, large baskets of food that was left over. Folks, I believe Jesus knew what he was going to be doing in this case, don't you? I believe Jesus knew exactly what he was going to be doing, and I believe that Jesus wanted people to see this miracle. Because if you think about what John said about the things that he wrote, he said, everything that is written, why? So that you will believe. Jesus knew that he was going to do this. He knew that. And what other explanation could be for a miracle of this magnitude than Jesus being the Son of God? Is there any other explanation? I can't think of any. Total miraculous here. And the lesson for us here is to stretch our faith. People like to say things, nothing is impossible with God. We say things like that a lot. Nothing is impossible with God. And it's true. But do we really believe it? I can't answer for you. Do we really believe that nothing is impossible with God? Do we really believe that the God who fed 5,000 men, not counting women and children, still works today? Folks, I believe it's time to unleash God's power here at Mackville Christian Church. Unleash God's power around us. You know, the congregation here at Mackville first met when John Quincy Adams was the President of the United States. And it's existed through times when this little town was thriving. Some of you have told me about some of these things. At one time there was a bank here, a school, including a high school. There were several businesses and even a small factory, from what I've been told. Many of those things are memories now. But when I've been researching about the town of Mackville, there's something that I found very interesting. According to the Census Bureau, the smallest population in Mackville since 1900 was 171 people, and that was in 1900. The highest population was 229 in 1980. And just for your information, in 2020, the last time we had a census, the population was 207. So sure, things have changed. Things have changed. I mean, I can ask you all about these businesses, and some of you will tell me exactly where these businesses were. Some things have changed. Some people have left town, businesses have left town. But some things haven't changed. There are still people here. And those people have needs. That hasn't changed, has it? There are still people here. There are people worldwide with needs. That hasn't changed either. Jesus calls on us to show compassion. That hasn't changed. But if we are to have those things, we are to bless people with those, we have to give. Give of ourselves fully. Give monetarily. Yes, sometimes I get worried about our offerings here. There's times I get worried about how I'm going to give, because I'm like everybody else. There's times that money's tight. Yet Jesus taught more about money than any other subject during his ministry. And while money was not mentioned in this miracle of feeding the 5,000, what do you see? Something tangible was given to Jesus. Something of value. Something of value is at the center, fish and bread, and Jesus used it. So the principle I'm telling you this morning is true. Nothing you give to Jesus is insignificant. Folks, as I mentioned, as I close this morning, this is a week that we set aside for Thanksgiving. And I remember growing up, we had the same routine nearly all the time. Every Thanksgiving Day, my father and my sister, until she went off to college, we'd get up early and we'd go strip tobacco in the morning. And my mom would stay home and cook dinner. Then my aunt and my grandmother would. As an adult, there's been some similar traditions in my family, and there's nothing wrong with those, because the Bible often refers to feasting as a time of joy. And I pray that everyone here can have a joyful Thanksgiving season, a great Christmas time. We're talking about the holiday season, Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's, all coming up in the next 6 weeks or so. But as you celebrate God's blessings, I hope you also remember that Thanksgiving isn't just a day. It's a lifestyle. It's a lifestyle of faith. It's a lifestyle of faith in God who created us. And let's have a lifestyle of giving. Giving back to people, showing compassion, stretching our faith, giving even when it might hurt us, to give even if it might seem insignificant, because God can use it. Folks, I pray that you have Thanksgiving that will stretch your faith. Stretch your faith just like this young boy gave those 5 loaves and 2 fishes. Somehow Jesus fed a huge crowd. Remember, nothing's insignificant that's due for the Lord. Stretch your faith. And let's unleash God's power here at Mackville Christian Church. Let's pray together.